Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through some new fantasy releases. And before I get into the books that I'll be chatting about today, I wanted to also really quick mention that if you are a manga fan, I did a similar style video for some new manga that's come out as of late. So I'll have that video linked. It's over on my side channel where I primarily talk about every other form of storytelling besides books. So manga, comics, video games, TV shows, movies. So if you're interested in that, I'll have it linked. But the books that I'll be chatting about today would be Immortal Longings, Threads of Power, and Sunlit Man, also called Secret Project 4. So I'm going to start with Immortal Longings. As usual, when I do these videos, I have timestamps in case there's only really one book you're interested in hearing about, or if you just want to kind of skip around. And with Immortal Longings, I did do a whole video, not just necessarily talking about the book, but also the way in which book talk affects, and social media, I should extend that too, but the way that social media can kind of affect our view of a book or how it can cultivate a certain expectation or audience of a book. And so it's just kind of a chatty discussion. But if you've already watched that, then you might already have an idea of what Immortal Longings is about, because I did go a little bit into the synopsis. And so if you'd like to skip ahead to the other ones, you can go ahead and do that. But anyway, for those of you that haven't heard much about Immortal Longings, the setup for this story is that we follow a society that has a stark difference between the upper class and the lower class, essentially the nobility and then everybody else. Everybody else lives in these slums, basically. The city is very run down. Everybody is experiencing poverty, and the only real thrill in their lives comes from this broadcasted tournament, you could say, of individuals who voluntarily fight one another, and they have to fight each other within the alleys and streets of this rundown city. And they have these little things that kind of alert them when someone's nearby. And so they have to be very on edge, and they have to be very skilled with fighting. A lot of these people have something called a jumping gene as well. So you can get through the tournament and live even if you don't win. But the jumping gene allows people to put their chi, or in some ways like their soul, into another person's body, so that if somebody, let's say, stabs them, if they're able to jump into another body before that one dies, then they can survive. And that adds a whole other level to this particular tournament. We have a main character who has the ability to jump. However, she seems very reluctant to use that ability. In fact, she seems like she doesn't want to do it at all, so she has to rely solely on her skills. She also seems to have very different motives behind why she's joining the tournament versus why a lot of other people do. A lot of other people do because they're destitute. They want the money that comes with winning this tournament. They want to be able to provide for their family, to pay medical bills for people they care about. She's in it, it would seem, to topple the empire. It seems like she wants access to the leader of this place, and she wants to try and kill him. But in order to even get to that position, she has to win the tournament. And within this, she finds herself kind of allying with somebody who is part of the nobility. And so they're giving her inside information. They're trying to also help her win the games and cheat, basically. And then there's another character who seems to have their own motives behind why they're entering the tournament that aren't necessarily related to the same things most people go into it for, nor are they necessarily related to why our main character is there. And these two, for some time, decide like maybe we should join forces, but also at some point, you're my enemy, so I can't really trust you, and so on and so forth. That's where the story kind of takes off. It is, I would say, kind of heavy-handed sometimes in its descriptions of the city and how people live. And this is, I believe, Chloe Gong's adult fantasy debut. And I think that the amount of descriptions was not anything that surprised me as somebody who reads a mix of YA and adult. To me, it felt adult. But I do think that some of the negative reception I've seen focuses on the descriptions and really zeroes in on not liking them, feeling like they're too excessive, which is completely legitimate, because sometimes adult fantasy, I'm like, all right, you can cut some of this, okay? So I understand that, but I actually enjoy the descriptions. I liked being able to further understand how much poverty is affecting people and what their lives are like. I think the setting is well described, and I enjoyed the setting because it's a little different than what I typically see in fantasy. It's a little more modern, but with that twist of the jumping gene, it's like there's magic mixed in, and then there's technology too. So I thought it was a cool blend of a lot of things. I've described it as feeling like cyberpunk mixed with anime, because I do feel like anime has certain really cool tropes where like the characters are fighting and they have certain cool lines and certain moves and they have certain looks, and not just literally like the expressions they make, but I mean their look, their way of cutting their hair and the style of their clothing. And it just kind of reminded me of some of the anime I've seen. So I liked the blend of a lot of things. It's not an absolute new favorite by any means, but I did like the twists and turns. I did like the reveals in the story. Some of them were a little obvious. Some of them I was a little more surprised by. I do want to read the sequel, so I had fun with it. I thought it was cool, and I think cool is the best way to describe it. I don't know that the descriptions of poverty and the people that are experiencing it, they're not necessarily the main characters and they're not the focus. So I don't really feel like the way that it was marketed as being this commentary on society and on poverty, I don't really think that I felt for the characters necessarily that are experiencing it, because they're not some of the main protagonists. But I think it kind of was more of like a background detail, and it illustrates why our main character so badly wants to kind of disrupt the norm right now. But I wouldn't say I felt emotionally attached by anything. I wasn't devastated really by anything in the book, but I had fun with it.
Next up, we have Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. This is a continuation series, and while V.E. Schwab herself and the marketing behind this says that this can be a new entry point for the Shades world, I would still heavily recommend that you read Shades of Magic first. I think so many of the characters and their development and their arcs are so rooted in what they've gone through in the first series that I can't imagine having picked this up fresh and then not knowing those things, because it plays such a role and impact on the events of this book. But if you do go for it and you do want to start here, I would love to know your thoughts as to whether or not you feel similarly. But anyway, getting into the setup for this story, we are looking at a number of years after the events of the original trilogy. Not so many that it feels like it's a completely different world or that everything has evolved and developed to a point where you don't even recognize this world or these characters anymore. It's not something like Mistborn Era 1 to Era 2 where hundreds of years have passed. It's only been 7, I believe, so it's not like a ton of time has passed, but because of that time jump, you will find that your main characters from the original trilogy, a lot of the beginning of the story is not just here they are now. It's actually diving into the trauma that they've experienced and what they are still holding on to, what they have overcome, the growth that they've had, the way their relationships have built, or the way that they have drifted apart. And you also see the changes that have occurred along the way. There's some new characters that get introduced that have played a big role in changing certain dynamics with the characters. And I actually really enjoyed all those things because these characters are all very distinct, and I like seeing that exploration of them, their arcs, and exploring their trauma in that way. However, I think that if you are not a fan of these characters, that I don't know that Threads of Power is going to be suddenly the thing that makes you like them more. I do think everybody's a little bit muted. They're not as extreme in their personalities as they were before, because they feel like they've matured, and they were very young in the original trilogy. So there's a chance that you might like them, but the beginning is more exploring that time that has passed. So it actually does jump back and forth between, 7 years ago, this many months ago, and I have found I've grown accustomed to that with V.E. Schwab through her Vicious and Vengeful series. So it didn't bug me, but I know for some people they do not like the split timeline. I enjoyed it. I do think it made the beginning very slow because the main setup for the book took forever to actually get around to. And the setup is that there is this dangerous object that can have a huge impact on their world, and there is a rebellious group who believes that magic is dying as a result of somebody who doesn't have magic being on the throne. They think that that's kind of an offense to magic itself, and they think that their world is almost dying. And so they want to take out the current ruler, and they also are very interested in a certain item. It seems there's somebody who's paying some of these henchmen-like characters to fetch this item and then try to use it to further their cause. Our main characters end up kind of getting wrapped up in this, in trying to find this object, in trying to stop this group, protect the ruler, and there's a new character, the one that's on this cover here. Her name is Tess, who she's, I think, on a fair amount of the covers. Her magic is a little different than what we've seen, or at least it's an extension of a certain element of the magic that we've seen in the past, so it kind of brings something new. A lot of us probably know that with the original trilogy, there are characters known as Antari who can go between parallel worlds. This new character has the ability to see threads that connect magic, that represent certain things with the magic, that connect people who have certain spells tying them together. She can kind of unravel these, she can work with these, she can fix objects, she can mess with spells. And so she currently works in a little shop, and in this little shop she finds this very important object kind of arrives at her doorstep to be fixed, and she gets caught up with all of the other characters, but that takes so long to get to. So I do think that the beginning is slow. I completely understand if people don't like the beginning. I was fine with it, but I also think that it's gonna make for a bumpy ride. The pacing is maybe going to irritate some people. And then once things do kick off, similar to with the Shades trilogy itself, I think once things kick off, it really pushes forward, race to the finish line sort of pacing. And that was exciting too. So for me, I had a good time all around. I do think there's some new questions that have come up. The way in which certain things are resolved, or the lack of resolution in some things, I am even more intrigued by, but I'm like, please, by the end of this trilogy, I need some answers, because there's a lot of things left unanswered, and a lot of doors left open, no pun intended, in the original trilogy when it concludes. And then with this world, it's very much like V.E. Schwab always planned to come back to it. And I think she's laid a lot of hints along the way, but I can't know that for sure without the rest of this trilogy. So I'm like, oh, I want the next book. And then I want the next book after that. But obviously it's going to be a couple years, and it's just hard to wait. So I had a fun time with it, but I'm a big fan of the original Shades trilogy. So not sure how newcomers are going to feel. And I can also understand if there's maybe some mixed reception with the way that the marketing has talked about it, the new characters, the pacing, but I had a really good time with it. Last for today, we have The Sunlit Man, the last of the secret projects, and maybe my least favorite Cosmere book. I say maybe. I think that it's like certainly my least favorite. And because I'm thinking about the main installments, I'm like, okay, well, I love the original Mistborn trilogy, so certainly this is beneath that. And I love the Stormlight book, so it's not as good as that. And I like Warbreaker, and like I like Elantris. I think like a lot of people, it's sort of middle of the road, so it's below that. Second era Mistborn, you know, it's no secret. I don't like Wayne, find him annoying, but there are certain elements of Mistborn era 2 that are really cool. I like the other characters. Some of the plot lines are interesting. So, you know, like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's at the bottom. And there's a very specific reason why Sunlit Man did not work for me, and that is it did not feel like I had everything I needed to enjoy this story. To me, it almost felt like reading the end of Mistborn Era 2 without reading any of Mistborn Era 1 or the rest of the Mistborn Era 2 books, because it takes place after so many of the other Cosmere novels, and it hints at things from the other Cosmere books, like it references things, but those references have to be very vague so as to not spoil what happens in those books. And I think that it's going to be very personal to each individual if they think that that jeopardized the storytelling in this, or if they feel like the story stood on its own just fine. For me, it did jeopardize it. I couldn't find myself being invested in this character and really feeling for them, because we do explore. It seems as though they've experienced PTSD, maybe like survivor's guilt, and a lot of heaviness that they're carrying around with them. But we can't really dissect that thoroughly without tapping into those memories that they would have, because those memories, like I said, are going to reveal things that we can't get revealed yet. And this person is experiencing this and this growth and kind of diving into their trauma through this particular planet they go to. And they're experiencing the magic on that planet, and the way that the magic is very tied to the planet itself and its weather patterns, and their survival of the people on this planet they're in dire circumstances every single day of their lives. And the magic was cool, the planet was cool. I think Sanderson really had a lot of fun with the secret project worlds, because it was like, let's just take some of my magic systems and go wild with it. Because Tress, of course, with the intense spores, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter with like, well, I can't really say too much with Yumi because I don't want to spoil anything, but I do think Yumi really has a lot of fun. It kind of has that sci-fantasy mix, and this one absolutely also had sci-fantasy mix in there, and I think it was on par with the world building of the others, but with the characters and the storytelling, I just I found myself just irritated by a lot of it. So strangely, I think if I come back to this years and years and years later, when we have the rest of Stormlight, and when I say the rest, I don't even mean the 5th book of this current arc, I mean like the next 5 also. I think once we have that, and maybe even Mistborn Era 3, then maybe I'll find that I care more, because I'll know what he's referencing when he's very subtly alluding to his past. I don't know though, because even the characters that he encounters on this planet, their stories are removed from everything else, and I didn't care about pretty much any of them. I felt like some of the dialogue with them was a little, I don't know, not as serious as I was hoping. Some of it was a little cheesy in my opinion, and I also just found that their growth was very minimal for what I was wanting and kind of what I tend to expect from a Sanderson book. It felt sort of surface level. So it was kind of a big swing and a miss for me. Even the antagonist to me was a big swing and a miss. I thought that they were not fleshed out well. I thought they were, I just didn't, I pretty much didn't, nothing clicked. Sadly, like nothing clicked with this one. Secret Project 2 is just, because I didn't care for that one as much as either, like Tress and Yumi. I think for a lot of us, Tress and Yumi have been way up there. This one to me is probably going to be, I haven't looked at anybody else's thoughts, but I have an idea that it's probably going to be very hit or miss. And then I think Secret Project 2 is overall kind of a big miss for a lot of people, but regardless, Secret Project 2 for me, it's the only non-Cosmere one. It just, the tone and the target audience and the story itself were just not for me, whereas this one I feel like it should be for me, and it just didn't work. So I have a hard time saying which one I liked less or more, but regardless, I can say it's my least favorite Cosmere book. Maybe that'll change when I reread it years and years and years later when I have more context. I'm very curious, without spoilers, if you can articulate if you liked it or didn't like it and what you did like or dislike about it. I'll have an in-depth chat the same way I've done for all the secret projects. That'll go up. I don't know if it'll go up before or after this video, but we'll get into spoilers in that video. And I think I know already that at least 2 of the people in that chat, I know that they liked it more than me. So I'm like, am I alone? Because I haven't looked at anybody else's thoughts. I haven't gone in depth with even those 2 friends. I'm like, okay, well, I can't talk about it with you until we do our chat. But I really wonder if I'm by myself in this. So let me know your thoughts and then I'll have that answer. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day and I'll see you later. Bye.